Today we have a special guest who's going to talk about empowerment in conflict, coaching principles for a resilient team. And she deals with conflict very often. And that's why she's going to be able to really give us some insightful ideas on how to deal with it. Alexandra Ross is Senior Director of Data Protection, Use, and Ethics at Autodesk. She's an attorney there, and she's going to share a little bit more about how to deal with interpersonal conflict yourself within your team. So welcome, Alexandra.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Let's talk about conflict and how often does it happen? How often have you seen it in your work, in your career?
Yeah, it's so funny that I'm talking about conflict because honestly, personally, I am not a person who likes dealing with conflict. I had to learn how to overcome some of those avoidance tendencies in terms of dealing with conflict, both in my personal and professional life. So, as an empathic person, I grew up in a family dynamic where I was the peacemaker, and it had a lot of kind of emotional impact on me, and you take all of that in. So I've had to learn over the years how to deal with conflict, how to manage conflict, and how to put up some of those ability to distance yourself and not take things personally, but addressing conflict. We can't always resolve conflict, but we can try to manage conflict and we can try to address conflict. So I do work in a technology company and an environment where there is a lot of conflict. And I would say there's a range of types of conflicts. There can be positive differences of opinion. There can be open and challenging discussions as we're driving projects forward. There can be that sort of creative tension that you have with a colleague. Those are all positive and productive types of conflict. Where we get into some trouble is where you have the type of conflict that can be divisive, that can be unproductive, or at the very end of the spectrum can be the hostile work environment, harassment, those types of conflict situations. But I do think for people that are working in a somewhat high stress environment in technology, in a legal space. So I'm in-house counsel at Autodesk, where I support our privacy, security, and data ethics function. So there's a lot of new ideas. There's a lot of new projects that the business is trying to launch. So there's certain conflicts that naturally arise as we're trying to drive some of these projects forward.
It's very surprising that you're empathetic, you're naturally empathetic and a peacemaker. That's a lot of what our listeners experience as well and how they are wired. I'm like that as well. And so this shows that, yes, you did find strategies to handle that in a way that didn't have such a large emotional, because it's exhausting emotionally to deal with these things.
It can be, and part of it is composing it. So addressing the facts, addressing things in some somewhat more scientific manner, and trying not to always be emotionally or personally attached to things. It's challenging, and I still feel exhausted, or I can feel depleted, or I can feel those sort of emotional concerns after a discussion that can get heated, or when I'm preparing to go into a meeting where I know there might be some conflict. So it's not that I have no emotional connection to conflict, but I've learned over time how to deal with it and how to react to it, how to anticipate those situations where there might be some conflict, and to be calm and collective and prepared so that I can go into a meeting and be assertive and state my position, but not get overly emotional, and also have that kind of detrimental, lingering impact on my own emotional or psychological state.
How have you been able to do that, to assert yourself in these situations, work towards resolving, or like you said, at least managing these conflicts, yet not get so emotionally involved and not take it personally? What are some things that you've used or you've done to get to that point? So you mentioned one thing, which was to bring more facts. You talked about scientific manner. So maybe you could explore a little bit more about that if you have an example, and any other techniques or things or mindset that you use to be able to deal with those emotions?
Sure. Part of it is recognizing those situations that might turn into some kind of conflict and accepting the fact that there is going to be conflict and not running away from that. So knowing that there might be some discomfort, but preparing myself with my arguments, with my position, with my point of view, with the facts that I'm trying to impart, whether I'm going into a meeting and I'm, for example, trying to get one of my direct reports promoted, and I'm coming in and I'm saying, here are all the reasons why this person is ready for a promotion. There might be some conflict or some pushback. Is this person really ready? How do they compare with other people? We need to wait until next quarter to promote people. So I'm anticipating some of the, may not be conflict, but some of the questions or the pushback that I might get, and also steeling myself in some ways for that emotional connection with someone where they're not going to say, oh yes, of course, we're going to do everything you've asked for. There's going to be a little bit of back and forth, but how can you mentally prepare yourself, but also be prepared just with the facts that you're trying to present? What is it that the position that you're trying to influence someone else to agree with your point of view? So that's the preparatory work. And then in the meeting itself, I try to do a lot of active listening. Part of where we get into trouble with conflict situations is we come in and we like railroad through, this is my way or the highway. And that doesn't always lead to the best results. You want to have your preparation in place, but you also want to listen to the other person's point of view, because maybe they raise a really good or impactful point that you can incorporate and you either agree or you can counter them. So being really present in that situation, listening to the other person's point of view, is some way that you can be prepared for that conflict situation and not let it take you off course. Also trying to be as calm as possible. You can do your breathing exercises, you can try to be centered. Those are all really helpful in terms of going into a situation and staying on your particular path with the points that you want to convey. And then afterwards, that's sometimes where we feel this sort of either let down or, oh my gosh, that was like a really hairy situation. And for certain people that don't like dealing with conflict or take that sort of emotional impact to heart and have that sort of psychological or emotional impact, you actually need to take some time for yourself after those conflict situations to let that out of your system and recognize that's okay, but you have to let that out, whether that means going for a walk or being in a quiet place, but anticipating and recognizing that you're going to have kind of that cooling off period after a high stress or conflict situation.
Now, I love that example that you gave when you enter a room, usually with a lot of people that are more senior than you, to defend the promotion of a team member. I've been there and I lost that conflict. And when people push back, I did not know what to say and I went silent, which was not great as someone who's there and trying to promote the team. And as a result, I lost team members because of that.
Wow.
So,
Yeah. But you also, it's interesting that you say that because there's a lot there's some social science about the different types of conflicts, and women, this is making a huge generalization, but women tend to avoid conflict because it makes us uncomfortable. We ignore or we withdraw. And because there's discomfort in that confrontation, and we fear being seen as aggressive or too assertive. So that avoidance technique, you can avoid the conflict altogether. You could have avoided even putting someone up for a promotion or avoiding going to that meeting altogether. But when you're in the situation and you don't continue to press or you don't continue to make your point, that can also be an avoidance technique.
when we don't know how to handle those emotions, our tendency is to shut down and give up.
That's one thing to recognize is that's okay. That's a natural sort of self-protection kind of reaction, and we shouldn't beat ourselves up about that. But we should also think, what are some other approaches or other methodologies that we can use to help resolve or manage a conflict? So whether you can be more collaborative, you can go in and you can be assertive, but you can also be cooperative. You can take some of the input from people who are contesting what it is that you're bringing to the table. You can try to incorporate that and reframe your position and maybe try to find some sort of win solution by collab. And that might be one way to get over the hump or that discomfort or the way that we tend to avoid conflict.
Yeah, a lot of the techniques that you shared are actually the superpowers of those empathetic, relationship driven individuals and leaders, like seeking collaboration, like doing prep work and really thinking things out, like taking time off, remaining calm, and really focusing on the influence part rather than on the attack.
Well, that's
So,
right. That's right. I think that, there's also a technique of competing. So you can be one of those people, and we all know these people, they're just itching for a fight. They are going to come into a conflict and ready to go. And that's a competing type of conflict resolution. It's their way. It's a win, I win, you lose type of situation. That doesn't really, I wouldn't recommend that. I would say that's not a good strategy for group problem solving. Being so competitive and grounded in that assumption that there's one person that wins and everybody else loses. There's a difference between being steadfast in your beliefs and influencing for your position to succeed and being so competitive where you're not listening to the other point of view.
and what if someone is not listening to your point of view? Let's say in that conversation you share it, you feel like you weren't heard. So you're hearing them, you're doing active listening, but you don't feel like they are truly listening to you and they don't get your point and they're only thinking about their thought, their argument. What do you do
Yeah,
then?
it's a really good point because we can't always pick our sparring partners in a conflict situation. We hope that we're working with like-minded colleagues in an environment, a work environment that has a culture and value that welcomes open debate, but people being kind and collaborative and respectful of one another. But that often isn't the case, or it may be that person that you're dealing with is having a bad day, is having some sort of their own emotional reaction. They might be shutting down or they might be getting upset. Part of it is reading the situation and trying to listen. If that person is being really recalcitrant, it might be better to just say, you know what, let's take a pause. We don't have to resolve this issue now. Why don't we come back to it tomorrow? Let's have a think. Let's regroup. Because if you're really finding that the person on the other side of the conflict is not listening to your point of view, you might not be able to resolve that conflict in that particular moment. And you might need to come back to it at a different time, in a different sort of frame of mind, or maybe you need to collect some new facts to be able to bring to that conversation. And maybe those new facts will convince the person.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. So putting things into perspective, getting new facts, trying it in a different approach. Now, let's take a step back. Later on, we're going to talk about how you help your team members resolve conflict. But how have your leaders in the past helped you resolve conflicts, like big conflicts? Maybe you have an example that you can remember.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I've been lucky in my career to have really good managers and mentors, people that have really helped me in my career, helped me both kind of professionally and personally along the way, and looked out for me. So one of the things that I've experienced with some of my managers is them helping me with both the what and the how of conflict resolution. So it's partially identifying like what's the specific issue. Is it just some sort of personality conflict you're having with someone? Is it just annoyance with the way that person, you just don't sync up with that person, but you have to deal with them? Or is it something maybe more aggressive where they're taking credit for your work, or they're not playing nicely with you on a group project. Again, it's case specific. So one of the examples I have is I was really feeling left out of a particular group project. This was early on in my career where I was one of the junior people on a litigation case. I worked at a intellectual property law firm early on in my career, and I was staffed on a case, but I was one of the more junior people. And I really felt like I was getting the grunt work, which obviously that's my role, that's fine. But I also felt like I was in conflict with one of the other partners because I wasn't given an opportunity to learn and to be exposed to some of the other meatier parts of the project. So I went to my manager at the time and we talked through it about how I could approach this person and gently and respectfully and nicely ask for additional tasks, to be able to say, I'm staffed on this project, I'm here to learn. What is it that how can I get more information? How can I get more to do? How can I get more content to be able to contribute more to this project? So we talked it out, and we even did a little bit of role playing to be able to identify specifically what it was, because it took me a while to identify what it was what was the conflict? What was it that was making me feel uncomfortable in this situation? So trying to identify that it was feeling not included, and how could I approach that? So identifying the what, that I was feeling not included, and then how could I approach that with the person who was delegating the work. So my manager at the time was really able to help me workshop that and practice and prepare for that difficult conversation at the time, because I didn't like conflict. I was avoiding conflict. So the fact that I was trying to approach it very gingerly was a really good first step. And my manager at the time really helped give me confidence that I wasn't crazy, that this was a valid concern, and that it was justified for me to go have this conversation with somebody and try to resolve this conflict around this particular project.
And that's such a common feeling for people, to feel excluded from a meeting, from a project, from work, from the team activities, or whatever that is. And often the conflict sometimes is one-sided. We don't really know. We're really frustrated. We're angry with the other person. We think that they're intentionally trying to leave us out. But maybe in that situation, as soon as you shared it in that very delicate, proper way, because I'm assuming this person had more power than you, was in a higher position, then you probably got what you want. There wasn't, or was there resistance from the other end when you did share?
There is that sort of assumption that someone is doing this intentionally to you. And oftentimes it's an oversight. It's a slight. It's not intentional. And by bringing things to people's attention, oftentimes they'll say, thank you for pointing that out to me. I didn't recognize I was excluding you. And that's what happened. It wasn't all rosy, but there was improvement in the collaboration on that project. And the person that I spoke to really appreciated my courage and coming forward and saying, I would like this for this reason. Would it be possible to get more context and to get some meatier parts of this project? But that person didn't notice that they were doing that and wasn't doing it intentionally. So we make up these stories in our heads oftentimes, and that can prolong the conflict, because we mythologize and we make up these stories that there's this person out to get us when it's really just an oversight. And that's part of why, and what I try to do and what I tell my team, is that you got to say something early on. You can't let things fester. You really have to pick the moment. But you also, if you're feeling uncomfortable and if you're feeling there's some sort of conflict, you want to try to identify it and address it early. Because if it goes on for weeks and weeks, you're just prolonging the pain of addressing the conflict. And you're making up those stories about what that other person is thinking, rather than just going to them at the very beginning and saying, hey, I'm noticing this. And that person can say, oh, I didn't realize I was doing that.
Yeah, and that's very powerful. Yeah, early on. And what I really like about your example as well, you went to this person and you expressed, hey, I would like this. I would like to be able to participate more in this and this, or I'm looking for more projects or more exposure, whatever that is, for this reason. At no point are you complaining about or indicating that they've done something wrong and that they're at fault. All you're doing is speaking on behalf of your desires and what you're looking for. And so there's very little risk in that.
There's value in being as objective as possible. So identifying what was causing me pain in that situation, what was making me uncomfortable or feeling that I wasn't included. It was the fact that I wasn't getting the substantive work to do and that I didn't really feel part of the cohesive team. So bringing that up, I could have said something more, but I chose not to. The person probably recognized that was the impact, but I didn't have to say, you're leaving me out. I said, I feel left out. I feel that I'm not part of the team. I would like to do more substantive tasks because those are the kind of the only things I can really control. Those are the only things that I understand is what my perception of the facts are. I don't know what that person's perception or intention necessarily are. So that's one way of doing it. And that worked at my stage of the career with that power dynamic. There are other ways that you can address conflict and go to the heart of the issue and say, I believe you're doing this, but that's tricky. And you have to be ready to be able to deal with that because that can be a little bit more challenging, that kind of interaction.
Yeah, you really have to be ready and prepared for some pushback there. And another thing that you mentioned is, you took the time to understand what it is that was frustrating you, what you wanted from the situation, what you were uncomfortable about, because it seems like initially you weren't even very clear and able to articulate that. But once you did think about that and your leaders did share with you how to do that. And another thing that I really liked was that your leader helped you rehearse it.
Yeah.
And figure out what to say, and that he or she.
It was a he. It was a he, but I've had female managers as well.
Yeah. So that person then sent you your way.
They set me free and said, go give it a try. You can do it.
Yes. Yes. So you started talking about how you help your team members. Now that you've gone through experience, you've learned a lot from your leaders, and now you're helping your own team members handle conflict with other stakeholders that are outside of the team. How do you do that? What's your approach to help your team resolve conflicts outside of you and maybe immediate people in the team?
Yeah. So a first couple of things is to let them know that I'm there to act as the sounding board, to acknowledge that there is going to be conflict in the workplace. And what we talked about at the beginning, that there are different types of conflict and sort of a range of the types of serious conflict that needs to go to HR as opposed to the everyday conflict that we deal with in the workplace. I try to let them know that conflict is natural. It's going to happen. And when it does, and they'd like to talk about it, that I'm there as a sounding board to help them kind of work through it. And then when my team members do come to me, I listen. A lot of times they just want to vent. They just want to say, I just got off this call and it was just horrible. And this person was undermining me. And this person was put a bunch of dates on the calendar that I put a bunch of deadlines that I wasn't prepared for. And they signed me up for all these deliverables and blah, blah. So a lot of times it's just letting them get it out of their system. And then I try to back up and say, okay, what was it about that interaction that you think was problematic? Was it the tone of voice? Was that person not being respectful? Were they undermining you in front of other business colleagues when they could have had a side personal conversation with you? Was it the fact that they put the dates and the deliverables with your name on it without consulting you first? Like, what specifically was the problem? Because if it's just a general, that was a terrible call, that's a terrible person, that's not super productive. It's helping them identify what's the root cause of the conflict. And then again, trying to analyze the situation or help them analyze that situation. Was that person having a bad day? Has that person acted like this before? How can we address this with this particular colleague? And then giving them some coaching of how they can then go and address it with that particular person. So that's one of the most important things that a manager can do, is not to swoop in and solve all the problems, not to micromanage, not to have everything be an escalation, but to find ways to empower your team members to solve their own problems, and give them some tips and some techniques and some approaches that you think might work, to talk it out, and then let them go try it, and then check back in with them. How did that conversation go? Was that person receptive to the feedback that you gave about, hey, when we're on a call, maybe we can try to be respectful of one another. Let's make sure that we're on the same page about the project plan and the deliverables and the dates, because I'm not able to meet that deadline that you signed me up for. How can you have that conversation with the other person? But coaching them and empowering your team members to do that on their own, rather than coming in and solving their problems for them.
When you shared that for the first time with me, I was so excited and so happy to hear that, because my experience has been similar, and I am against just solving everybody's problems, because I would never want my manager to solve all my problems. My best managers did exactly what you're doing. And I didn't have a lot of them. I had 1 in 13 managers who did what you're doing. And that was the most empowering manager I ever had, and who I learned from. It's so powerful. And I want to know from you, what kind of feedback do you get from your team members once you go through that process with them to help them and empower them to resolve their own conflicts?
They appreciate it. I've had team members from all different backgrounds and different levels of assertiveness, shall we say. So there's some people that you really have to encourage to manage a conflict. You have to encourage them to address the conflict to begin with, because a lot of, especially junior people at a company, might think, well, this is just the way it is. I have to deal with this difficult colleague and I can't speak up. And sometimes it's cultural. I can't speak up and I can't voice my concern even to my manager. I just have to live with this uncomfortable situation. So I've had team members where I didn't know that in weeks or months that they've been dealing with this conflict at work or this difficult colleague. They finally came to me and said, I can't take it anymore. How do I resolve this conflict? And then I have team members that are more forthcoming and will come to me more often and earlier on in a conflict situation. But I do think that when I do get feedback from them, they appreciate the fact that I'm pushing them a little bit. I'm encouraging them to address the conflict. And I'm also being very clear that I will help them, but I'm not going to do the work for them, that I'm here for them as their manager to listen to them and to help them, and also escalate again as needed if it's going to be one of those really serious types of HR incidents. But I would say 9 times out of 10, these are situations that your team members can address. They just need a little bit of encouragement along the way to get that done, to get in their mindset and to practice it, and to have a couple conflict situations that they have addressed and that they have been able to manage. Maybe they didn't resolve it completely, but they felt better after having that conversation with the person. And maybe the project actually improved and the collaboration improved because they spoke up.
Absolutely. And from what you just shared, you're very non-judgmental in your supporting and coaching. You're very encouraging. It's incredibly empowering. And once they do have those wins, it's hard for them. They're going to have the conversation. They can't just say, hey, please fix it all for me. Like, mom, take care of me. But you are giving them that little challenge with all the support. And once they're able to overcome that, then they're going to feel empowered to the next time bring it up earlier, or actually try having a conversation if it's not a big deal just yet. It's not one of those major issues. And it will save a lot of workplace relationships, because otherwise you end up with all these people on your team who don't want to talk to this other person.
That's
I
right.
can't be in this team. I can't be in this project because I hate this person, because this person is disrespectful. And then it's really hard to do anything.
We all have to work with difficult people, and hopefully you work at a company that has very few difficult people. But yes, we all are have challenging people that are part of projects that we're working on. So that's you can't avoid that forever. And in terms of kind of meeting people where they are, I really appreciate it when people come to me with, not that I appreciate it when they come to me with their problems, but when they feel comfortable coming to me as their manager and saying, I need some help with this. What I also appreciate is when they have done a little pre-work, when they've thought about it a little bit, and we can work on something together. What's a little bit more challenging is when someone comes and just vomits out what their problem is. And you have to say, okay, let's think about this. What do you think would be an appropriate resolution? How would you consider solving this problem? And having them think through that on their own, rather than, again, solving it or doing the pre-solving for that person. So getting them to think about it on their own, and that's a learned skill. So that's something that you can coach people, you can help them, you can guide them, you can point them to resources. There's so many books and articles about conflict resolution, conflict management. I've tried to read over the years. I try to impart that to my team members. I try to point them in that direction. One of the really great things is when a team member will resolve a conflict on their own, or will manage a conflict on their own, and then come to me with a success story and say, oh, that person that we talked about last year that was really difficult, I just, had a really great interaction with that person because I addressed that conflict, or where they've done something on their own initiative and come to me with a success story, as opposed to always having to do the work. Now they're off on their own. They've incorporated that into their own style of working, in their own sort of authentic way of dealing and collaborating with people in the workplace, because of some of the earlier conversations that we've had.
One of the most satisfying things for mentors is to know that the mentee took the learning and applied it and had positive outcomes, and brought it back and shared the positive successes. So you feel like your time is not being wasted, that your efforts, because it's effort.
It is effort. And there is a lot of investment that you make in your team members. And this is one of the, how to empower your team members to resolve conflict is a really good investment of your time, but it is an investment of time and your energy. And you have to make time for that if you think that's important.
Absolutely. How do you incentivize your team members to bring these issues back to you as early as possible, and to do the pre-work that you're talking about?
We talk about it sometimes in team meetings. If there's a, not that I'm like sharing and airing dirty laundry, but we can talk about it generally. Like, how do we, at my company, we talk about being trusted partners with one another. There are certain values within the company where we have integrity, we work as one company, we are collaborative. So we talk about that sort of in team meetings, about how are things going and what are some experiences people are having. How can we be the best legal partners to our colleagues? What are some of the ways that we can partner with our business colleagues when we're giving them legal advice, when we're giving them strategic advice? So the discussion about conflict comes up in those more general discussions. And then those individual one-on-one conversations that I might have with a particular team member who's having a conflict, whether they're in crisis mode or they're just coming to me and saying, hey, I'm feeling a little uncomfortable, what would you suggest? I will, at the very beginning, try to say, what have you done to think about this before? Or maybe send them away and say, why don't you come prepared, we'll talk about it tomorrow, but let's do a little bit of thinking about what's the root cause of this problem and how would you resolve it? Because sometimes in the moment, you can't put someone on the spot necessarily and say, how would you resolve this? Sometimes they can come up with it and we can have that conversation, but sometimes they need a little bit of time to prepare. In answer to your question, we talk about it generally as a group, but then in those one-on-one meetings, I'll try to reinforce what my preferred approach is on how to help them resolve their conflicts, how to help them manage the conflicts. And then when it's a repeat, I've had a lot of team members who've been working with me for several years. They know the drill. They know that I'm going to ask them these questions, so they've already come prepared.
They learn it over
Yeah,
after a
yeah.
few times they learn the drill. That's powerful because at the time when they bring it to you, they're probably in a very triggered emotional state. And just by hearing your calm voice and listening to your objective questions, it probably puts them in a different perspective, in a different place where they can go back and calm down and then be able to think better about how to answer those questions and do their pre-work.
And again, that takes some effort and ability on the manager's part to be able to take that in and let the person be in their emotional state and recognize that's natural and maybe say, I know how you're feeling. I've felt triggered by a colleague and I felt upset about a call that didn't go well or about a presentation that didn't go well or whatever it is that the person is in the midst of. So trying to find that connection with your personal experience so that they understand that what they're feeling in the moment of being upset about a conflict is okay. And then trying to help them think about it a little bit more objectively. There's certain techniques of you can not make light of it or make a joke about it necessarily, but try to help them put it in perspective. You know, that again, conflict is normal, conflict is going to happen. What is it in particular about this 30-minute conversation that upset you? And how can we put it in perspective of we have to get on, we have to address this, we have to continue working with this person. How can we get over this hump rather than really cycling on it and making this be the focus of your life? Like, that's not productive. Let's have the moment of being upset. That's okay. And then what are we going to do to move forward? And also have some distance from that particular conflict.
Yeah, the distance is very powerful. So again, you're using that empathy side of yours, but with the direct and problem solving abilities to help your team resolve these issues in a very kind, empathetic way. But you're also helping them empathize with the person they're having conflict with by asking them, could there be a reason? Maybe they're having a bad day or something like that.
Or they're feeling pressure from their manager. Like,
That's
we don't
right.
always know the reasons behind why people are doing something. We can look at the facts and we can understand our experience. We can try to put ourselves in the other person's shoe. But yeah, if they're having a bad day, if they're feeling pressure, if there's a lot of different reasons why someone can cause conflict in a particular meeting. You don't have alignment on your sort of common goals and objectives.
Right.
What are you trying to get out? What are you trying to get out of this particular project? Maybe everyone needs to back up and say, what's the scope of this project? What are we trying to accomplish here? Because if there's not alignment on, that's going to create some conflict, especially in the sort of work environment that I and my team are working on, where we are providing legal advice to our business colleagues so they can pursue a particular business initiative. We're going to look at the legal regulations or the policy and try to give them some advice on whether what it is they want to do is going to succeed or is going to have some risk. But if we're not aligned on what it is, what's the intent or the purpose of the project, then our conversations are not going to be productive.
A lot of conflicts can emerge simply because two people are talking two completely different things.
You're talking over one another and you're not solving the same problem.
You don't have a common denominator, a common question that you're working towards. How and at what point did you start having this philosophy around resolving conflict and helping your team resolve conflict?
It was early on in my career. So I worked for a law firm, and then I worked in consulting, and then I ended up working in a large company where I had a fairly small junior team, and there was a lot of drama, shall we say. There was a lot of drama. It was a lot of, this person was mean to me, this person said this. There was a lot of sensitivity for people and maybe misconstruing or taking things out of context. And so I would have them coming into my office, sometimes in tears, sometimes just like upset in a huff about some perceived slight. So part of it was like self-preservation on my part of just, wow, this is a lot of drama. What am I going to do with this? This is taking its toll on me as their manager. So trying to find some way to help them maybe not be less sensitive, but help them acknowledge the severity of things and help them try to address some of these things on their own rather than always running to me saying this person was mean to me. So that was the origin of it, was a period of time where there was a lot of drama in the team that I was just trying to figure out how to solution to help them, but also to help myself stay in a better equilibrium.
Oh, I love the word equilibrium. Yes, it's very necessary. And it's very much the situation where you can give your team the fish every single time, feed them the fish, or you can teach them how to fish a couple of times and then they're going to get their own fish whenever they're hungry.
Yeah.
Right. Even long term, it's more sustainable.
That's right. And it also helps them in their career and professional development, because my manager helped me and taught me some of those techniques and some of those approaches. And so I'm trying to share my experiences with my colleagues. I'm still learning. It's not that I'm perfect at addressing or resolving conflict. It's a work in progress, but I'm trying to work through my own conflict situations at work and also share my experiences with my team members. And I often learn from what they share with me. They may have some really good insights and approaches and suggestions of how as we're talking through a particular conflict situation, they might actually have some really good insights that I learned from, and then maybe I adopt in my next conflict situation. Oh, remember that person when they were dealing over there, they tried this. Like, I learn from them every day.
That's a powerful point. Even for them to move up and grow, they probably need these skills. It's going to help them in their next role when they keep growing. I imagine that you personally, when you're in a big conflict, you probably reach out to someone to get perspective.
I do. At this point, I have a really good friend who's not at my company. She's also an attorney, but at a different technology company. And we often commiserate or share some of our challenging experiences at work. And so she's my sounding board. So she can help me if I'm having a challenging conflict that I need to address, or she's having something at her place of work. So we can talk things through. So that's my go-to person when I'm in a pinch.
It's always great to have someone like that, especially outside of the company. It really helps.
Yeah.
I also really dislike drama. And whatever I can do to get rid of drama from my life, I will. And some of the things that you mentioned, those techniques, both helping the team get rid of drama of your team with other teams, and your own drama, is just so helpful. It just creates lightness and uplifts everyone.
Yeah.
One last question for you. We talked a little bit about women who generally don't like conflict. Do you have any tips on how women specifically can deal with conflict as it comes up without being seen as difficult, aggressive, abrasive, which is something that is more likely to happen with women?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I'm going to reiterate some of the things we've already talked about, some of the points I already made. I would say be direct, be authentic, have a plan, think about the what and the how of, what it is that is causing the conflict and how you're going to address that. Pick the situation. Are you going to have a face-to-face conversation with this person? Are you going to try to address it over email? Or, the methodology of your approach of dealing with the conflict is really important for us to think about and be prepared. But it is difficult for women in that sort of perception that if we do speak up and if we do point something out, especially to a superior or someone in a position of power who's a male or even another female, you can be seen as being too aggressive. It's a double-edged sword, because what I'm suggesting in our conversation today is that we should not be avoiding conflict. I wouldn't suggest being confrontational. I wouldn't suggest being overly competitive in your approach. You have to be mindful. You have to be as calm and collected as possible. But even if you do all of that, there's that perception possibility and that sort of bias that unfortunately women have to deal with. So I don't have a great answer for you, unfortunately. I would say just do your best, be authentic, be direct, and give it a try. The worst thing we do is we avoid the conflict altogether. And then sometimes we end up leaving the company because it was such a toxic environment and we never spoke up and we never tried to address what the conflict was.
Oh, so no matter what, try to speak up and address it in a way that's non-confrontational. Any last thoughts, Alexandra?
You were talking about sort of mommy and children. I was thinking about that a little bit as I was preparing for this. And there's that concept of helicopter parenting where, parents are so concerned about their children being hurt or in a stressful situation that they're always trying to solve their problems. So I'm coining a term, don't be a helicopter manager, because I don't think that's productive. There are ways to empower your team by giving them some foundational techniques and approaches so that they can manage their own conflict, so that you're not doing that helicoptering, swooping in to fix it. And also being straight with them that there is conflict in the world, that we all have to deal with conflict in the world, and how we manage it and how we address it is really up to us.
Yeah, I love the concept of not being a helicopter. We need to find a word for the opposite of helicopter
I know. I
manager.
guess being a manager who empowers your team, that's a little too long. We'll have to think about the catchy phrase there.
I'll make a very powerful book one day. Yes, so absolutely. A conflict is normal. It is there, and we can help our teams and people around us and even ourselves handle it with less drama, getting results so that we can stick around. But it's always best to speak up and, like you said, try to handle it even if we don't resolve it.
That's right.
This has been wonderful, Alexandra. I absolutely enjoyed talking about conflict, and I'm 100% with you on all of your views on conflict. So this has been really great, and I learned a lot as well. Thank you.
Thank you.